Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to talk about some of the books that I've read recently that I really enjoyed. Some of these I read during the OWL, some of these I read after the OWL's magical readathon. I've definitely read more than this, but these are just the ones that I wanted to talk about. These are some of the books that I wanted to shine a light on. I think they stood out above the others that I've read. So I only have 5 or 6 books here, but if you want to see everything else I've read, you can definitely check out my Goodreads. I also occasionally update my Instagram stories to show what I'm currently reading. So the first book I want to talk about is The Guinevere Deception by Kiersten White. This is a YA fantasy retelling of the King Arthur legend. So in this book we actually follow Guinevere's point of view, and in this story she's actually a changeling. She's not actually Guinevere. The Guinevere that we know actually passed away, so our main character is actually pretending to be her throughout the entirety of the book. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very fun and very lighthearted. I know for a lot of people Kiersten White is not the best author. I've seen a lot of people give other books that she's written kind of 3 stars-ish, maybe even less. I don't usually see people kind of praising her books a lot, but I thought this was really fun. I thought the writing for the most part was pretty standard and straightforward. There were some chapter breaks that I thought were really well written that follows the point of view of the malevolent character that we don't know. There's obviously some romance here because Guinevere has yet to marry Arthur when the story starts, but she eventually will. I actually really enjoyed the romance. Arthur in the story is portrayed as the typical kind of old school fantasy hero, very loyal, very just ruler, and I personally really like that trope. I know it's kind of boring, nice Boy Scout type character. I'm personally kind of over the whole love interest is a bad boy type trope. I think that's over and done with, and I'm really just happy to see our main character fall for someone that's not gonna treat her badly, and it's the relationship itself is not gonna be the issue. One thing that I really loved about the romance is that it didn't become the central issue. Obviously our main character has some things that she needs to deal with her feelings for Arthur, but it at no point ever takes over the story. I didn't have to worry about the evil force in the story, as well as the relationship that she had with Arthur ever being a huge plot point. So this book was a little predictable, which I know for some people that would be the reason why they would rate it lower. I personally, even if I predict certain elements or certain reveals, I don't mind as long as that journey to that reveal is worthwhile or it was entertaining, and I can see how the main character might not have realized the reveal, it wasn't so obvious to her. So yeah, I thought this was really fun. I thought every character was kind of explored well enough that I was interested in each of their stories. So I'm definitely going to keep my eye out for the next book. So the next book I'd like to talk about is The Book of Cody by M.R. Carey. This is the same author who wrote The Girl with All the Gifts. I believe this is the first book in a trilogy. So this was an arc that I got from NetGalley from Orbit. So thank you so much to the publishers for letting me read this ahead of time. So this is a post-apocalyptic book set in England. I want to say maybe it's 4 or 5 centuries into the future. I don't think they ever give you a set timeline. They kind of talk generally. So in a lot of post-apocalyptic books there tends to be one event that sets off a chain reaction, and it's hinted at that in this book scientists had decided to genetically modify trees, which we do technically do that, but to the point where trees are able to get nutrients from places other than water, CO2 and sunlight. In this case they adapted to the point where they can get nutrients from people. So the setting of this book is very much giving me Mother Nature's revenge type vibes, which is really cool. We don't still have the full human history yet because our main characters don't know that either. So we follow a young boy named Cody, and he's about to come of age. His village is about 200 people. So the coming of age ceremony that he and other people his age go through is whether to see if they have this ability to access futuristic technology, right? So this technology has been around for at this point centuries, but for us as a reader, it would be, we consider it futuristic technology. So if a child doesn't have the ability to use this tech, then they go back to their family trade and do that for the rest of their life. But if you do have the ability to use this tech, then you go live essentially in the most luxurious household, basically the family that kind of governs the whole town. But the tech itself is used to protect this village from outside forces, either being trees or old military tech that hasn't been properly shut down. This book is really slow paced. The author does really want to paint the scene for you so you can really get immersed into this world. He also kind of takes the time to properly kind of explore not only our main characters but also supporting characters, so they're each kind of like fleshed out, even though they might not be, you know, present all the time like our main character is. So there's definitely not like right off the bat like action. But I do think that if you do like a slower paced book, or you can read a slower paced book that takes a lot of time to develop, you might be fine with this. So this book does touch on themes that are very relevant right now. Environmentalism, big businesses is another one. Governments putting certain interests above like the interests of its people. It's really easy to draw parallels. So I always like that. That seems to be something that happens a lot in like post-apocalyptic books. So yeah, that's definitely prevalent here. The writing is a little weird because right off the bat we realize that our main character and a lot of the characters in this book are illiterate. I personally think I read really fast, but I really had to take my time, especially with the first like 5 or so chapters, to kind of get like the rhythm of this character's narrative, because when our character doesn't properly know certain words, or uses words I've never heard of, or uses verb tenses that are obviously wrong, it's really hard to kind of like, it was really hard to kind of go at my regular pace when I read a book. That did take a second, and I'm not sure if everyone will be able to like acclimate to that change. And there's no like outright like written history about like the downfall of like the human race. Even our older characters only really give you like oral histories as well, but we do have an AI character that kind of is like fitting that role of like the like historian that's gonna hopefully tell us throughout the story like what really happened, or like just give us like few details to like fill in the gaps. I enjoyed this book. I thought it was really great. A little slow paced, but really cool. Haven't read anything like this. I'd also like to talk about Paper and Fire by Rachel Caine. This is the second book in the Great Library series. The first book is called Ink and Bone, I believe. I've talked about this series before on my channel, but this is an alternate history fantasy series where in this world the Great Library of Alexandria never burned down. It still exists today. In this world, books and knowledge is like held to a higher standard, like a much higher standard, to the point where the Great Library has become like this overbearing force, and they don't allow people to own copies of books, much less like original publishing of books. The Great Library is such a powerful force that they have their own like kind of army, like their own kind of guard that like enforces their rules. I think the author Rachel Caine tried to like frame the Great Library after the actual like Catholic Church when it was in its like the heyday, when it was like at the strongest it's ever been. The Great Library also really controls what type of books it allows the public to read, and what books they kind of keep to themselves. Free thinking is really limited. Anything or anyone that might threaten the power that the Great Library has is stomped out almost immediately, and this creates entities like burners who burn books in order to like spite the Great Library. And there's also black market groups that buy and sell books for a lot of money, and our main character Jess, his father, is probably one of the most well-known black market lords, I guess you could say. And our main character Jess, his father, is probably one of the most well-known black market book dealers. Jess himself doesn't really care for that side of the business. He just wants access to books. And then one day Jess's father tells him that, I know you don't care for the family business, but I do need you to pay your way and contribute to the family. And he basically forces Jess to infiltrate the Great Library through this kind of like trial system, and it becomes almost like Hunger Games-ish. Not as much like death as the Hunger Games, but still very dangerous. People will die. But yeah, that's just the first book. Second book, I can't really give too much detail because it spoils pretty much everything that happened in the first book, but I still really enjoyed the series. I wish more people read it. I think books about books are like probably one of my favorite kind of tropes, as well as if you're a history kind of nerd. I have my bachelor's in history. I love this. I thought it was really fun. So the next two books I want to talk about I actually listened to on audio. They are the first two books in the King Fountain series by Jeff Wheeler. I love Jeff Wheeler's books. I read his Harbinger series, which takes place in the same universe as this, but very different story. They are so good. I listened to these books on audio using the Kindle Unlimited app. Some Kindle Unlimited books have like the audio attached to it. I do recommend Kindle Unlimited if you read a lot. If you only read like a handful of books, maybe it's not for you, but I typically read like over 15 books a month, and this like really helps me. So yeah, I recommend Kindle Unlimited. Real quick plug, not sponsored, whatever. So this series takes place in a fantasy kingdom where this concept of being fountain blessed exists, and people who are fountain blessed have magical abilities on top of like having like a spiritual like connection to this force of nature, whatever you want to call it. And we do meet some of these characters throughout this story. Just because you are fountain blessed doesn't also necessarily mean that you're like a good person. People use their abilities in different ways. So in the first book, we follow a young boy named Owen. He's about 11 years old. His father is like the lord of like the easternmost like duchy or whatever you want to call it. So when the story starts, the king of the kingdom obviously has recently gone through a war where he defeated a pretender to the throne. So unfortunately for our main character Owen, his father didn't immediately choose a side. He wanted to kind of like see who would probably be like the likely winner of this battle, this war, and the king obviously won. And out of spite, the king has punished anyone that didn't immediately fight for him. And for Owen's father, that means he's going to go through this kind of trial to see whether or not the king finds him guilty and whether or not he should execute him. And in the meantime, Owen is taken to the palace essentially as a prisoner. This is like a very like bare bones summary of the story because this is very political, and I can't like explain every political like plot line without like spoiling like anything. One thing that I really love about Jeff Wheeler's books is that there's no one clear kind of like plot line that you see from book 1 to book 5. It's not like a here's our main character, the good guy, this is the bad guy, our good character has to defeat the bad guy, and end of the story. That's not really how Jeff Wheeler kind of writes his books. There's a lot of twists and turns. It's also very like slow pace. It's a political fantasy. There's a little bit of like war and stuff like that, but mostly it's like people working behind the scenes. Mostly it's just people kind of maneuvering the like political machinations of this fantasy world. I think everything that Jeff Wheeler puts into a book, whether it's like a small like subplot, at some point fits into the bigger picture of the overall plot. So for example, there is a romance in this book, but the romance itself does in some part weave into the like grander scheme of things. And I think that's really great. I really love that. It's not like two separate things. Like this is a romance plot and then this is like the political whatever plot. They do go hand in hand, and I really love that. I would say that Jeff Wheeler's books are very clean fantasy, and that while there is topics like adult topics like sex and death and war and stuff, it's never like gratuitous. Like he's not going to explain like someone's head getting chopped off like in great detail. So for that, I do think that multiple people of different age groups can read this book and love it. I would say like the youngest would probably be maybe like young teen, young YA, just because I don't think I would have had like the reading comprehension for this book while I was in middle school, but definitely like high school I definitely could have like loved this book. I read his Harbinger series, which is also really good, and I recommend that one. Though I think Jeff Wheeler recommends reading this series before that, but that one has like more Victorian vibes, and our main characters are like two women who are basically sisters. But this one's really good as well. I've read the first two books. I kind of want to pick up the next one really soon. I think the first one's called The King's Poisoner or The Queen's Poisoner, and the second one's called The Thief's Daughter. But yeah, I'll have those somewhere here so you can see what they look like. I think I've only ever seen like one person like mention his books before, like on YouTube, and that would be Reagan from Peru's Project. More people should read his books if you like political stuff. So the last book that I want to talk about is the most recent book I've read, and this is Solace by Gail Carriger. This is the first book in the Parasol Protector, I think is what the series is called. Well-liked series. This is, I would say, an adult steampunk Victorian paranormal romance story, which hits a lot of yeses for me. So this takes place in England, and in this world, supernatural entities, vampires, werewolves, and ghosts are common knowledge. Everyone knows that they exist, but the population of these paranormal entities aren't large enough that humans like worry for their safety. So they're pretty much somewhat accepted into society. Different countries have different like views on like these characters. So the common understanding of these paranormal characters is that when a person goes through the transformation for a werewolf, or when a person becomes a vampire or becomes a ghost, they had so much soul, and that is how they made that transformation. So the more soul you have, the more likely you are to become a vampire, werewolf, or a ghost. There's no like accurate way to like measure that. This is just like the theory, the commonly accepted theory. But our main character Alexia is soulless. She has no soul. And because Alexia has no soul, she's basically a neutralizing agent for these supernatural characters. When she touches a vampire, they become human. If she touches a werewolf during its change, they become human again. I believe she can also like exorcise ghosts, even though that wasn't like shown in this book. So like in most urban fantasies, there's usually some sort of mystery. Our main character gets involved, and there's like a love interest that shows up every now and then. And I didn't mind the love interest. I thought he was really funny and endearing, and there's a little bit of like alpha-ness because he'd be like that, but I didn't mind the romance. I didn't mind the love interest. I thought they were fine. I thought their relationship was like bickering, kind of almost enemies to lovers, which I enjoyed. The writing is a little humorous, so if you don't like when the author is intentionally trying to be humorous, or the book is trying to be humorous, and it doesn't hit those like comedic notes with you might not like this book. I thought it was funny. I thought it was funny because if you can acknowledge the kind of ridiculousness of the Victorian era, especially with how women are told to behave and the kind of expectations that they have to uphold, you might find the humor in this. So my camera died. Hopefully I ended like on a good note with Solace, but if I didn't, I love the book. If you're looking for urban fantasy, romance, paranormal romance, Victorian vibes, I recommend. So that's all I wanted to talk about. Hopefully I keep this channel like somewhat like poppin', like maybe like one video a week. I kind of procrastinate a lot, so we'll see where that goes. But thanks so much for watching. I will link all my socials down below. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, whatever. I'm really active on Instagram. If you want to like DM me there so you can get like a quicker response, you can do that there. Peace out.